They wear the collar of faith. They stand between light and darkness. But even the servants of God are not safe from the things that lurk in the shadows. These are not stories of simple hauntings. These are testimonies, whispered from pulpits, confessed in sealed rooms, or carved in blood on the walls of empty churches. 3 priests, 3 places, 1 truth. Evil doesn't always wait outside the church. Sometimes it lives within. Prepare yourself for the horrors they never meant to speak of. These are the stories they tried to bury beneath Scripture, and the darkness that refused to stay silent. I've served the church for over 2 decades, long enough to understand that not all evil wears horns or breathes sulfur. Some simply waits, quietly, patiently, behind the stone walls we think make us holy. The following is not a sermon, it's a warning. In 2011, I was assigned to a coastal town in Oregon called Belhaven. You won't find it on most maps. Even the locals say the sea tried to reclaim it years ago. The town had just over 400 residents, mostly elderly, and was blanketed year-round in a mist that never seemed to lift. I was sent there to oversee the reopening of St. Florian's Church, a long-defunct parish that had been closed after a fire in 1963. It had sat unused for nearly 50 years, overtaken by mold, soot, and seagull droppings. A historical group from the archdiocese wanted it restored, to reclaim sacred ground. I was chosen not because I asked, but because I never say no. They said it would be peaceful. When I first arrived, I was struck by how lifeless the town felt. The locals were polite, even warm at first, but always slightly distracted. Their eyes would drift, their ears would perk, as if listening for something beneath our conversation. I took residence in the small rectory adjacent to the church grounds. The church itself had already been stabilized, walls reinforced, roof repaired, but the inside still bore the black scars of fire. Soot-stained marble scorched pews, and up in the rafters, unreachable with any ladder we had, hung the remains of the bell tower. That was the first thing they told me. The bell, once known across the county for its rich, solemn tone, had melted in the fire. They showed me a photograph from 1963. A collapsed iron bell, blackened like coal, split into pieces at the foot of the tower. But here's the thing. Every single night, without fail, at exactly 3:15 a.m., I heard it. The bell would ring 3 times. Low, measured, deafening. It vibrated through my bed frame. It made my teeth ache, the kind of sound that feels older than language. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I would sit up, sweaty and disoriented, and stare out the rectory window. The church stood still in the fog, no lights, no motion. No one else in town mentioned it. So neither did I, until my 5th night. That evening I was visited by an elderly woman named Agnes Holland. She brought soup, bread, and a photograph from a drawer she hadn't opened in years. It showed St. Florian's congregation in the 1950s, black and white, men in suits, women with veils, children lined in front, solemn as statues. At the far right corner stood a man, tall, skeletal, with a long clerical robe that hung past his shoes. His hands were too long. His eyes were completely black, not shadowed, black, oily, dead. "That's Father Eli," she said, handing me the photo. I'd never heard of him. "He served here for 7 years before the fire," she continued. He was changed after his pilgrimage to France. Started preaching about sound, about the bell being more than just a call to prayer, that it was a doorway. Her voice cracked on the last word. She said he stayed in the bell tower for days at a time, fasting, meditating, listening for something. After a while, the children were forbidden from attending his masses. Parishioners stopped showing up, until one night, fire consumed the tower. No one ever found Eli's body. They sealed the tower after that, she added, with brick and iron nails. You'll see. That night, I didn't sleep. At 3:15 a.m., the bell rang again. But this time, I heard footsteps in the nave, deliberate, slow, crossing from the altar to the rear of the church. I stayed in bed, drenched in sweat, clutching my crucifix like a weapon. And when the footsteps stopped, a single knock echoed against my door. Just one. I did not open it. The next morning, I walked to the church and stood beneath the bell tower. The seal was there, just as she said, a stone arch bricked in with old mortar, and across it 3 iron nails hammered into the shape of a cross. I touched them. They were ice cold. I asked the local contractor, Dave Bellington, if anyone had been inside the tower since restoration began. He went pale. "No one's touched that place, Father," he said. "We don't even talk about it. Most won't walk near it after sundown." I asked why. Dave hesitated, then said, "Because sometimes the bell don't just ring. Sometimes it screams." He wasn't lying. 4 nights later, I stayed up, determined to confront whatever was happening. I lit every candle in the rectory, laid out holy water, and kept a liturgical hammer beside me. 3:15 a.m., 3 chimes. The first was normal, the second, too loud. The third, it wasn't a chime, it was a wail. Not mechanical, human, but wrong, not pain, not grief. It sounded like celebration, like something exalted. I ran to the church with my cassock barely tied, a flashlight in one hand, holy water in the other. The nave was colder than a freezer. I saw my breath, and there, standing in front of the sealed tower, was a man. Tall, thin, dressed in black robes that shimmered like oil. His back was to me. His hands were pressed against the bricks. I raised my flashlight. "Hello?" He didn't move. "Who are you?" He turned his head just slightly, enough for me to see the corner of a cheek, bone white, cracked like porcelain. Then he whispered something, no louder than breath, but I heard it inside my skull. "You've heard the bell, now they hear you." He vanished. Not disappeared, not ran. Vanished. The candles in the nave burst into flame one after another. My crucifix bent in my hand. I dropped everything and fled. I requested a full exorcism of the grounds the next morning. Rome delayed it. Local authorities claimed I was experiencing post-traumatic stress. They offered psychiatric leave. I refused. I stayed, because I had read something in Agnes's journal, something that made me realize what was really happening. St. Florian's bell, according to her notes, was forged with metal brought from a sunken ship recovered in 1864. The ship's crew had all drowned, found with mouths open, lungs full of salt and ash. The bell had been cursed from the beginning. It didn't call the faithful. It summoned the waiting. One night, August 14th, I performed a rite of binding using an ancient litany I was warned never to use, a prayer older than the Vatican, something that was once outlawed by the Council of Carthage. I said the words aloud at the altar. The bell screamed, The tower cracked down the center, and the bricks began to bleed. From within the wall, dozens of hands, gray, thin, clawed, began pushing through. Faces followed, mouths open, but no eyes. I rang the small sanctus bell 3 times, drenched them in blessed salt, and I screamed one name, "Eli!" The tower burst with sound, a pressure so intense it ruptured blood vessels in my eyes. When I awoke, it was dawn, and the tower was gone, collapsed into itself. No bodies, no hands, just rubble. They transferred me the next day. I never stepped foot in Belhaven again, but I still hear it. Every year, on August 14th at 3:15 a.m., my ears ring so loud I can't think. And in the ringing, a voice, "They remember you, Father." The bell tower never stops. I have served as a priest for over 30 years. I've heard every kind of confession: lust, theft, betrayal, even murder. Some whispered with tears, others with pride disguised as regret. But one night, one confession, made me question whether what sat across from me was ever human. It happened in winter, February 4th, 2019. A night so silent, it felt unnatural. Outside, a snowstorm blanketed our small parish in northern Maine. St. Bertram's Church stood like a fossil, its bell long silenced, its walls chilled with ocean wind. We had stopped using the confessional booths years ago. Most modern congregants preferred open conversation. The old booths, tucked near the side altar, were now more furniture than function, relics, dusty and long forgotten. That night, I was alone. The sacristan had gone home early. I stayed back to finish preparing for Ash Wednesday. As I locked the sacristy, I heard the heavy oak door groan open. At first I assumed it was the wind, but then I saw a man step into the nave, tall, lean, wrapped in a long, wet coat that dripped onto the tile. His boots left no snow trail, only a streak of dark moisture behind him. He didn't speak, didn't look at me. Just walked straight to the right side confessional, the one where Father Dawson had died in 1982, and entered. I hesitated. My stomach tightened with something I hadn't felt in years: unease. The man moved with eerie confidence, as if he had done this before, as if he belonged here. I followed. I stepped into the priest's side of the booth, closing the door behind me. Inside, the air was colder than outside, much colder, like a tomb. I cleared my throat, made the sign of the cross, and spoke the ancient words, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." There was a pause, a long, breathless pause. Then I heard him inhale, wet, ragged, like lungs full of fluid. "Forgive me, Father," he said, "for I have returned." Returned? I stiffened. My voice came out weaker than I intended. "How long has it been since your last confession?" A pause. 41 years, he rasped. "But the blood has not dried." A cold draft slipped through the slats in the wood. My breath fogged the air. I wanted to open the screen to look at him, but something held me back. "Are you from this parish?" I asked. His voice shifted. It grew lower, almost layered. "I was born here. I died here." I froze. And then he began whispering, not to me, but to someone else, someone unseen. "He doesn't remember, but the wood does, the walls do. They've soaked it all in. Screams, fire, sin. My mouth went dry. The wood remembers. That was the phrase Father Dawson had used again and again in his final weeks before they found him hanging inside the very booth I was in now, before he'd carved Latin warnings into the altar with a nail from his shoe. I stood up and opened the door. The man's side of the booth was empty. The door, however, was still swinging, back and forth, and on the wooden floor, 3 wet spots. Not water, thicker, darker, red. That night I didn't sleep. I lit every candle in the church and stayed near the altar until sunrise. There was no heat, just the sound of old wood creaking and something faint, like breath beneath the floorboards. The next morning I searched the parish archives. There had been a man named Nicholas Albrecht, a drifter who came through St. Bertram's in 1978. According to the old records, he gave a confession on February 4th to Father Dawson. 2 days later, he set himself on fire in the church basement. His remains were found blackened and melted near a torn hymnal and a melted bronze crucifix. But that wasn't what shook me most. In Father Dawson's own journal, on the page dated February 5th, I found these words. He said the names. He said them 3 times. The names opened the door. That night, I returned to the confessional with a flashlight and holy water. I opened the booth and removed the wooden panel behind the seat, something I remembered from my training. Behind it was a crawl space I never knew existed. Inside, coiled in the darkness, were the charred remnants of something once alive. Bone. Fabric. A scorched collar with the name tag still legible. Far J. Dawson. There were carvings all along the inner wood, half burned away. Latin phrases, some biblical, some not. One repeated over and over again, Et venit cum nomine suo. He comes with his name. I returned to my quarters and began praying, but my prayers felt unheard. The next evening, just past midnight, I was awoken by 3 knocks, not on the door, but on the floor beneath my bed. I froze. The air in my lungs refused to move. Then the voice returned, no longer from the confessional, but from inside my walls. Julian, it whispered. It knew my name. I jumped from bed, clutched my crucifix, and began reciting the rite of exorcism, not just the short form, but the full sequence. Every candle blew out at once. The floorboards rattled beneath me. And then came the voice again, mocking, layered with multiple tones. You opened the booth. You heard the name. That's all I needed. I fled the church that night and drove 2 hours to the archdiocese in Portland. When I explained what happened, they did not laugh. They did not question. One of the bishops simply nodded and said, We've heard of this before. The hollow confessional. It moves from parish to parish, never attached to people, only places. St. Bertram's was sealed and condemned within the week. They buried the booths, salted the foundation, but I still hear him. Some nights, always February 4th, I wake at 1:13 a.m., 3 knocks, a whisper, Forgive me, Father, for I have returned. I told this not to be believed, but so I don't forget. My name is Raphael. I'm a Catholic priest from the Diocese of Santa Cruz. That year I was assigned to Las Piedras, a remote village buried deep within the scorched red hills of southern Bolivia. There was no electricity, no phone signal, and no priest had ever managed to stay longer than a few months. Before I left, my spiritual director told me, Not every place needs preaching. Some just need someone who won't run. I didn't understand what he meant until I arrived. Locals at the last stop before the hills refused to speak of the village. One old man selling cigarettes leaned in and whispered, "If you hear the bell at night, don't answer it." I dismissed it as superstition. But the moment I stepped into Las Piedras, silence greeted me. No children, no roosters, only dust and wind. The church, my residence, was crumbling. The cross above the altar hung crooked. My room smelled of rust and rot. In the corner sat an old wooden chest, nailed shut. Carved into the lid were the words, "San Benito has returned." That night I couldn't sleep. The air felt thick, as if someone was breathing beside me. Around 1 a.m., I heard 3 knocks under the floorboards, soft, deliberate from inside the wood. I locked the door, grabbed my rosary, and prayed through the night. The next morning, I asked Eliza, the woman who brought food, about it. Her eyes filled with dread. "You should leave, Father," she said, trembling, "before he chooses again." I started investigating. Whispers from the villagers spoke of 7 infants who had vanished over the past 15 years. Each disappearance happened on March 21st, the feast of Saint Benedict. I visited an old blind woman who lived near the cemetery. When I asked about San Benito, she gripped my hand and whispered, "He is no saint now. He was sacrificed." That night, I broke open the wooden chest. Inside, wrapped in an old cloth, was a leather-bound journal. The name on the first page, Father Francisco, the last priest who served here. At first the entries were calm, sermons, daily prayers, but then came erratic handwriting. "Third child gone last night." I saw a white figure before the altar at 2 a.m. The bell rang. No one touched the rope. Not me, not them. He called it. On the last page, stained with blood, was written, "Under the altar, the crypt." I found a narrow stairwell behind the altar. Below it, a stone chamber reeking of mold and decay. Symbols were carved into the walls, some sacred, some profane. At the center stood a broken altar and a small cracked bronze bell resting on a crimson cloth. Inscribed along its rim were the words, "3 knocks, 3 souls." Someone had used this bell in a twisted ritual and paid in lives. The next night, the knocking returned. Then, the church door swung open, though I had bolted it shut. Outside, thick fog rolled in, and then a voice. "Father, help me!" I stepped forward, and the church bell tolled, 3 slow, echoing chimes. Looking up, I saw a small figure in the mist. No face. Just a hollow shadow where a face should have been. The next day, I confronted Eliza. She wept, then confessed, "Our ancestors made a pact. To survive the drought, they gave 1 child a year. If a priest interferes, he's chosen instead." I didn't want to believe, but I understood now why no priest ever stayed. March 21st. I prepared a private exorcism ritual. No one knew, just me, the sacred oil, salt, and my crucifix. As midnight struck, the bell tolled again. Wind howled. The sanctuary doors burst open. A figure entered, over 6 feet tall, body cloaked in shadows, face like a cracked stone mask, eyes burning red. I shouted the Lord's Prayer, threw holy oil on the bell. It shattered. The figure screamed, a sound not of this world. Candles flared, the walls trembled. Then everything went black. I woke beneath the altar. The church was scorched, the altar cracked. Outside, the villagers stood in silence. No thanks, no words, just stares. I packed my things. No one stopped me. I live in a monastery now, far from Bolivia. Every night I still hear 3 knocks in my dreams. I don't know if I saved the village or simply postponed something worse. But I know this much. Not all saints hear prayers. Some only hear blood.